The Borden Family Case, a tragedy born of forbidden love and a desperate flight. Part 1, The Sealing of a Fateful Pact. Our story begins not in the chaos of a crime scene, but in the tranquil, rolling countryside of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. It is here, amidst the quiet farmlands and hushed communities, that we find the Borden family, Michael and Catherine, a couple whose lives were a testament to faith and stability, and their children, including their 2 daughters, Kara and Caitlin, and a younger son. The Bordens were a pillar of their close-knit, homeschooled community in Lidditz, a town known for its peaceful, idyllic charm. Michael Borden, a devout elder in his church, was a man of quiet authority and deep conviction. His life and the life of his family was a testament to the values they held dear: tradition, piety, and the sanctity of the family unit. Into this carefully constructed world stepped David Ludwig, an 18-year-old from a neighboring town. David, also a homeschooled teenager, was a member of a social group that brought together like-minded young people. He was outwardly polite, a seemingly normal teenager with a passion for cars and a quiet demeanor. He had a connection to the Borden family, a friendship that had been cultivated over time. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, David harbored a secret. He was in a clandestine relationship with the Borden's 14-year-old daughter, Kara. Their relationship was an intricate tapestry of lies and deception, woven to keep it hidden from Kara's parents. The age difference, 4 years, was a chasm in their world. In the eyes of Michael and Catherine Borden, this was not a budding romance, but a dangerous and inappropriate liaison. Their concerns were rooted in their faith and their desire to protect their daughter, who they believed was too young for such a serious commitment. They forbade the relationship, issuing a stern and unyielding decree that David was no longer welcome in their daughter's life. This parental decree, a final and definitive boundary, was the catalyst for the tragedy to come. It was the moment where 2 worlds, once quietly coexisting, collided with a force that would shatter their foundations forever. David, seeing his secret relationship at risk of being completely extinguished, saw the parents as an obstacle to be removed, not a boundary to be respected. The tension between the teen's secret world and the parents' firm rules reached a fever pitch. A few days before the murder, David and Kara had a prolonged secret rendezvous. When Kara returned home late, the parents, already suspicious, confronted her. The truth of their secret relationship was revealed, and in that moment, the fate of the Borden family was sealed. On the morning of November 13th, 2005, David Ludwig arrived at the Borden family home, not to apologize or to plead his case, but with a calculated and chilling intent. He was armed with 2 weapons, a .40 caliber Glock semi-automatic pistol and a .223 caliber rifle. The Borden's 13-year-old daughter, Caitlin, and their 9-year-old son were home at the time. A tense and protracted argument ensued between David and Michael Borden, a final, desperate attempt to reason with a young man whose logic had already been consumed by desperation. The argument, which Caitlin later described as lasting for over an hour, concluded not with an agreement, but with an act of unimaginable violence. Part 2. The Violence and the Unholy Flight. Caitlin Borden, a silent witness to her family's undoing, would later recount the horrific details to police. As Michael Borden turned to walk away, David drew his pistol, a single deliberate shot to the back of the head. Caitlin, her young mind unable to process the horror unfolding before her, ran into a nearby bathroom. She heard a second shot. This second shot, the sound of which would forever haunt her, was the sound of her mother, Catherine Borden, being murdered as she sat in a chair. David Ludwig, in a chilling and methodical display of malice, had snuffed out the lives of the two people who stood in the way of his forbidden love. He then ran through the house calling out for Kara. He was a predator in a moment of triumph, a boy who had crossed an irreversible line and was now looking for his companion for an unholy flight. Kara, according to court documents and her own later account, was initially a bystander, a young girl whose life had just been shattered by the boy she loved. As David fled the scene in his parents' red Volkswagen Jetta, she ran out of the house terrified and in shock. She ran not to her siblings or to the neighbors, but toward the car, a chilling decision that would later lead to a public debate about her role in the events. She later told investigators that she wanted to get as far away as possible, get married, and start a new life with him. Their flight from Lidditz was a desperate 600-mile journey, a high-speed chase against an ever-closing net of law enforcement and a public alert system. The family's 9-year-old son, the only one to escape the immediate scene unharmed, ran to a neighbor's house, a small beacon of normalcy in a world that had just been turned upside down. The 911 call, a frantic plea for help, was the beginning of a manhunt that would captivate the nation. An Amber Alert was issued for Kara, the missing daughter of the murdered couple. The media, in a frenzy of round-the-clock coverage, broadcast the details of the crime and the names of the two teenagers on the run. The nation watched as their red Volkswagen Jetta was sighted on highways across the country, a ghost on the road, a symbol of a youth gone tragically wrong. The manhunt, a massive and coordinated effort involving state and federal authorities, came to an end the next day in Belleville, Indiana, nearly 600 miles from the crime scene. David, a boy who had left behind a trail of blood and shattered lives, led Indiana State Police on a 5-mile, high-speed chase, a final, reckless act of defiance. The chase ended when he crashed the Jetta into a tree. The two teenagers were taken into custody, unharmed but with their lives forever altered. Part 3. A plea, a verdict, and an end to justice. The capture of David Ludwig and Kara Borden was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a grim and convoluted legal process. The question on everyone's mind was Kara's role in the events. Was she a victim, as her family and defense attorney claimed, or a willing participant, a girl who had fled with her boyfriend after he murdered her parents? The kidnapping charges against David Ludwig were eventually dropped after it was revealed that Kara had left the home willingly, a piece of information that painted a more complex and unsettling picture of the events. David Ludwig confessed to the murders, a chilling and unvarnished account of how he shot the parents to be with their daughter. His confession, which included the detail that he had gone to the Borden home armed with several weapons, left no room for doubt about his premeditated intent. David Ludwig was 18 and a half years old at the time of the murders. The prosecution, led by Lancaster County District Attorney Don Totaro, initially sought the death penalty, but in a move that brought a swift and final end to the case, Ludwig pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, statutory sexual assault, and a firearms violation. In exchange for his plea, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 9.5 to 19 years in prison on the other charges. The plea deal, a sobering testament to the finality of his actions, spared the Borden family and the community from the prolonged and painful ordeal of a trial. The sentence was handed down by Judge David Ashworth, who told Ludwig, "By your useless and selfish acts, you destroyed and permanently altered the lives of countless people." With those words, the legal chapter of the Borden family case was closed. David Ludwig was sent to prison, where he remains to this day, a man who, in a moment of twisted love and desperate violence, destroyed a family and his own future. He later attempted to appeal his life sentence, arguing that as a young man, he should have been treated as a juvenile, but his appeal was denied. Part 4: The Quiet Aftermath and a Haunting Legacy. In the years following the murders, the Borden family and the community of Lidditz were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Kara and her younger siblings were forced to navigate a world without their parents, a world where the details of their family's tragedy were forever etched in public memory. The story of the Borden family case became a historical record, a cautionary tale about the devastating consequences of forbidden love, parental defiance, and a youth's descent into a vortex of violence. The case of David Ludwig and the Borden family is not just a true crime story, it is a chilling psychological study of how a seemingly normal young man could commit such a heinous crime. It speaks to the darkest corners of the human psyche, the point where a boy's infatuation and his parents' protective instincts tragically and violently collided. It is a story that haunts the quiet, peaceful community of Lidditz to this day, a somber reminder that even in the most serene of settings, unspeakable violence can take root and destroy everything in its path. The Borden family case serves as a poignant and unsettling historical document, a testament to the fact that even the most carefully constructed lives can be undone by a single desperate act of defiance. The memory of Michael and Catherine Borden, a couple who died protecting their daughter, lives on in the quiet streets of their hometown, a haunting and tragic reminder of a love story that ended in a symphony of gunshots and a desperate cross-country flight to nowhere. The case stands as a grim lesson in the unsparing truth that a young man's decision to destroy a family's boundaries led to the destruction of their lives and his own. The Borden family case, in all its tragic complexity, is a story that will continue to be told, a chilling historical account of a quiet town's loss of innocence and a family's tragic end. It is a story that reminds us of the fragility of peace and the terrifying potential for darkness that can reside in the most unexpected of places. The Michael Madison case, a tragedy in East Cleveland. Forget Part 1, a childhood fractured, a darkness takes root. Our story begins in the bruised heart of East Cleveland, Ohio, a city struggling with the weight of poverty and neglect. It is here, in this landscape of abandoned homes and quiet despair, that we must first look into the life of Michael Madison. Born in 1977, his was a childhood devoid of the foundational love and stability that so many take for granted. He was the product of an accidental pregnancy, and his biological father, John Baldwin, denied paternity and was absent from his life. Michael was raised by his mother, Diane Madison, a woman who, burdened by her own demons, subjected her son to a brutal and chaotic existence. Court documents and psychological evaluations would later paint a grim picture of Michael's early years. He was the victim of profound and relentless physical abuse, not just at the hands of his mother, but also from her numerous boyfriends. The abuse was so severe that it was documented by children's services agencies, leading to him being removed from the home and placed with his grandmother. This early trauma, this searing introduction to the cruelties of the world, would serve as the toxic soil in which a dangerous and destructive pathology would grow. It was a history that would be presented at his trial, not as an excuse for his actions, but as a chilling explanation for how a person could become so devoid of empathy. The defense would argue that his dysfunctional upbringing and the lack of a stable, positive male role model created a man whose ability to make good choices was severely impaired. As he grew, Michael Madison would rack up a series of minor offenses, a prelude to the darkness to come. He had drug-related convictions in 2000 and 2001, but the most ominous red flag was his 2002 conviction for attempted rape, for which he served 4 years in prison. He was classified as a sex offender, a designation that was meant to protect the community, but which, tragically, was not enough to save the lives of his future victims. It was during this period that a dangerous fascination began to consume him. In the shadows of his own city, another monster, Anthony Sowell, was already at work, a man who would eventually be convicted of murdering 11 women and whose crimes were eerily similar to those Madison would later commit. Madison was reportedly fascinated by the Sowell case, watching videos about it on YouTube, and even crying while doing so. This unhealthy fixation on a local serial killer was a sign of the deep-seated rage and contempt he harbored for women, a hatred that a former girlfriend would later testify was so profound that he can't stand the female species. It was this combination of a fractured past and a twisted admiration for another killer that would set the stage for a new reign of terror in East Cleveland. Part 2. The Scent of Death, the Discovery of a Horror. The horror began not with a frantic 911 call or a public manhunt, but with a foul, putrid odor. In the summer of 2013, an employee of a cable television company working near Madison's apartment noticed a sickening smell emanating from a garage. The garage was shared by Madison and other tenants, but the stench was unmistakable. On July 19, 2013, police responded to the call. What they found inside was a scene of unspeakable cruelty. The decomposing body of a woman, tightly wrapped in multiple layers of garbage bags and sealed with tape. The body had been bent at the waist, her head bound to her legs, an act of final indignity that spoke to the killer's cold, calculating nature. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, immediately drawing comparisons to the Anthony Sowell case. The police, fearing they had another serial killer on their hands, swiftly secured the area and began a methodical, painstaking search. The very next day, their fears were realized. In a backyard brush pile behind the garage, they found a second body, also in garbage bags, and just 15 yards away, in the basement of a vacant house, they found a third. The victims were identified as Sherelda Helen Terry, 18, Shatisha Sheely, 28, and Angela Deskins, 38. Their stories, once vibrant and full of potential, were reduced to a grim list of dates and facts in a coroner's report. Sherelda Terry, a young woman with a summer job at a local elementary school, had been missing for just over a week. Angela Deskins had been missing since June 2013, and Shatisha Sheely had been gone since September 2012. The victims, whose bodies were in various states of decomposition, had been killed over a period of 9 months. The medical examiner determined that Terry and Deskins had been strangled to death with a belt. The body of Shatisha Sheely was too badly decomposed to determine a precise cause of death, but she had a deep bruise on her face, inflicted while she was still alive. After obtaining a search warrant, police entered Michael Madison's apartment. The evidence of his crimes was everywhere. Further evidence of decomposition, as police records would later state, along with personal items and a blood-stained carpet. He had a 2-hour standoff with police at his mother's house before being taken into custody. In a chilling moment, he reportedly confessed to killing one of the women and disposing of the body, and to disposing of another. He claimed to not remember killing the third. His confession was a stark and unfeeling account of how he choked a woman to death, left her in his apartment while he went out drinking, and later folded her up and moved her to the garage. He had kept their bodies near his apartment, prosecutors would later argue, so he could look down on his trophies. Part 3. The Trial. a smirk, and a father's rage. The trial of Michael Madison began on April 4th, 2016, a few years after his arrest. He faced 14 counts, including 3 counts of aggravated murder, 3 counts of kidnapping, 3 counts of gross abuse of a corpse, and 1 count of rape. The prosecution, confident in their case, was seeking the death penalty. Madison's attorneys, in an effort to save his life, did not contest his guilt, but instead focused on the mitigating factors of his abusive childhood. They presented evidence of the psychological damage he had suffered, arguing that his troubled past provided a basis for understanding how he evolved into the person he became. But the jury, after less than a day of deliberation, was not swayed. On May 5, 2016, Michael Madison was found guilty on all 13 counts. The verdict was a moment of vindication for the victims' families, a promise that he would never do this again. The mitigation phase of the trial began, a period where the jury was to weigh the evidence of his childhood trauma against the horrific nature of his crimes. The families of the victims had a chance to speak directly to the man who had taken their loved ones from them. It was a moment of profound grief and searing anger. During his emotional testimony, Van Terry, Sharilata's father, addressed the killer. "Right now, I guess we're supposed to, in our hearts, forgive this clown who has touched our families, taken my child," he said, turning to face Madison. In that moment, Michael Madison was seen to smirk. The smirk, a flicker of malevolent triumph on his face, was a final act of cruelty that broke the dam of a father's grief. Enraged, Van Terry lunged at Madison, a desperate and raw display of a parent's pain and a final impotent act of defiance against a monster. The scene, captured on video, would go viral, becoming a lasting image of the raw human cost of Madison's crimes. On June 20, 2016, Judge Nancy R. McDonnell sentenced Michael Madison to death by lethal injection. McDonnell, who had never issued a death sentence in her 20 years on the bench, said she was struck by the sheer inhumanity of what one human being can do to not one, but 3 human beings. The death penalty, however, has been stayed pending his appeals, a legal process that continues to this day. Part 4. The Haunting Legacy of a City in Pain. The Michael Madison case is more than a story of a serial killer. It is a profound and unsettling reflection on the city of East Cleveland and the deep-seated issues that plague it. The discovery of the bodies brought to light the city's struggle with crime, poverty, and abandoned properties, which, as one resident noted, created a criminal fantasy world. The case of Michael Madison, coming on the heels of the Anthony Sowell case, became a grim symbol of a city where women were disappearing and their deaths were going unnoticed. The victims, Sherelda Terry, Shatisha Sheely, and Angela Deskins, were not just statistics. They were mothers, daughters, and friends whose lives were brutally cut short. Their stories are a testament to the devastating impact of violence and a haunting reminder of the lives that were forgotten in the shadows of an impoverished city. The legacy of Michael Madison is one of profound and lasting trauma, not just for the victims' families, but for an entire community. The case stands as a chilling reminder of the long-term consequences of childhood abuse, the danger of unresolved mental illness, and the terrifying reality that monsters can live among us, hidden in plain sight. It is a story that will forever be a part of East Cleveland's history, a painful chapter that serves as a somber warning that a broken person can, in turn, break others in the most horrific of ways. The smirking killer, his face forever etched in the public's mind, is a testament to the unfeeling evil that can grow in the deepest, darkest corners of the human heart, an evil that no amount of childhood trauma can ever fully explain or excuse. The Ronald O'Brien case, The Man Who Killed Halloween. Part 2, The Life of an Ailing Man. Ronald Clark O'Brien was by all outward appearances a good, upstanding citizen of Deer Park, a quiet, middle-class suburb of Houston, Texas. He was an optician, a husband, and a father of 2 young children, Timothy, aged 8, and Elizabeth, aged 5. He was an active member and a deacon at a local Baptist church, sang in the choir, and was well regarded by his community. His pastor even described him as a good Christian man and an above-average father. But this public persona was a carefully constructed facade hiding a life in shambles and a soul corrupted by greed. In reality, O'Brien was a man of immense financial desperation. He was a job hopper, having been fired from over 20 different companies in a decade for negligence and fraudulent behavior. In the fall of 1974, with his take-home pay barely covering rent and food, he was on the brink of being fired from his latest job at Texas State Optical, suspected of theft. It was later revealed that he was over $100,000 in debt, with a car about to be repossessed and multiple defaulted bank loans. His life was a house of cards, and it was about to come crashing down. Driven by a desperate need for a solution, O'Brien concocted a monstrous plan. He decided to use the life insurance policies he had recently taken out on his children as a macabre means to escape his financial ruin. Unbeknownst to his wife Danienne, he had purchased a series of policies on Timothy and Elizabeth, totaling nearly $100,000, equivalent to over $600,000 today. The policies were a ticking clock, and to collect on them, O'Brien needed to ensure at least one of his children would die. His plan, however, was not just to murder his son, but to frame an anonymous stranger, making the crime appear to be a random act of Halloween sadism. This was a narrative that, while an urban legend for decades, had never resulted in a documented death. O'Brien was about to change that. Part 2, The Night of the Horrible Crime. On Halloween night, 1974, Ronald O'Brien, his 2 children, and a neighbor, Jim Bates, with his 2 children, set out for a night of trick-or-treating. The weather was rainy, and the children were rushing from house to house. At one house, the porch light was off, and no one answered the door. The children, impatient, wanted to skip it, but O'Brien insisted on waiting, telling them, "Don't worry, kids, I'll get you some candy." He lagged behind while the children ran to the next house. When he caught up with the group, he was carrying 5 21-inch pixie sticks, claiming he had received them from the mysterious unlit house. He handed one to each of the 4 children, and the 5th to another child they encountered on their route. The children, excited by the giant candy straws, put them aside, but Ronald urged his son Timothy to eat his. According to his wife, Ronald had never been particularly enthusiastic about Halloween before, but this night he was overly excited, even forcing his son to choose the pixie sticks over other candy. Later that night, as the family prepared for bed, Timothy decided to eat his pixie sticks. He struggled to get the powdered candy out of the straw, and his father, ever so helpful, took the stick and rolled it between his hands to loosen the contents. Timothy took a mouthful of the candy, but immediately recoiled. "It tastes bitter," he complained. His father, in a chillingly calm act, gave him Kool-Aid to wash away the foul taste. Within minutes, Timothy was in agony. He began vomiting and convulsing violently, running to the bathroom where his father held him up as he went limp in his arms. An ambulance was called, but it was too late. Timothy O'Brien was pronounced dead at the hospital within an hour. An autopsy revealed a fatal dose of potassium cyanide in his stomach, enough to kill 2 adults. Part 3, The Investigation and the Unraveling of a Lie. The death of a child from poisoned Halloween candy sent a wave of panic and fear across the community and eventually the nation. Parents rushed to local police stations, turning in their children's candy, terrified that a madman was on the loose. The police, however, were immediately suspicious of Ronald O'Brien. His story of a phantom house was flimsy at best. When he took police to the house, no one there remembered giving out any candy, and the house had been abandoned for months. Furthermore, the candy sticks were found to have been opened, their contents partially replaced with cyanide, and then resealed with a staple, a detail that the manufacturer of pixie sticks confirmed was not their practice. The other 4 children who received the poisoned candy were miraculously unharmed. One of them, a friend of Timothy's, had tried to open his candy but couldn't get past the staples. The swift action of the police, who went door to door to recover the poisoned candy, saved the lives of 4 more children. Each of the remaining pixie sticks contained a lethal dose of cyanide, enough to kill 3 or 4 adults. The case was no longer a random act of malice. It was a targeted, calculated murder. As investigators dug deeper, the truth about O'Brien's life began to surface. They learned of his immense financial debt and the life insurance policies he had taken out on his children just months before. His attempts to make the murder look random were just as incriminating. Prosecutors argued that O'Brien had a wanton disregard for the lives of others and was willing to kill 4 more children just to cover his tracks. A chemist testified that O'Brien had previously asked him about the fatal dose of cyanide, and a chemical supply salesman revealed O'Brien had inquired about buying the poison. The evidence was overwhelming, and Part 4, the trial and the final act of a monster. Ronald O'Brien's trial began on May 5, 1975, and captivated the nation. The defense, led by the legendary criminal defense attorney Marvin Teague, attempted to lean into the urban legend of a mad poisoner, but it was a losing battle. O'Brien himself took the stand, a move a prosecutor would later call a mistake by a narcissist who believed he could talk his way out of anything. He maintained his innocence, but his lies were transparent. The jury deliberated for just 46 minutes before finding him guilty of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. It took them another 71 minutes to sentence him to death by lethal injection. O'Brien's conviction brought a moment of justice, but it also forever changed Halloween. The myth of poisoned candy became a very real fear, causing parents across the country to scrutinize every treat their children received. The legacy of his crime was so profound that a prosecutor, Mike Hinton, would later say, "Nobody has forgotten this. This is the man who killed Halloween for little kids. It will never be the same." The Todd Allen Reed Case, The Forest Park Killer, Part 1, A Shadow in the Woods. The year 1999 saw Portland, Oregon, a city famed for its lush greenery and laid-back culture, gripped by a growing sense of dread. The serene, sprawling wilderness of Forest Park, a beloved urban oasis, was being desecrated. The first sign of this grim reality came in early May. A couple, enjoying a peaceful walk with their dog, discovered a body partially concealed by branches and leaves. The victim was Leila Faye Moeller, a 28-year-old homeless woman with a troubled past of mental illness and drug addiction. She had been brutally strangled and sexually assaulted. The discovery was horrifying, but at the time, it was a single, isolated tragedy. That changed just a few weeks later. As police meticulously combed the area, they found another body. This time, it was Stephanie Lynn Russell, a 26-year-old homeless woman who had been an acquaintance of Moeller. She, too, had been sexually assaulted and strangled, her body discarded with a chilling casualness just a quarter mile from the first victim. The horrific truth began to crystallize. This was not a random act of violence, but a pattern. A serial killer was preying on vulnerable women and using the urban forest as his dumping ground. The media, reflecting the city's terror, quickly gave him a name: the Forest Park Killer. The investigation was a race against time. The killer's signature was clear: strangulation and sexual assault of homeless or transient women in and around Forest Park. A crucial piece of evidence was recovered at the first crime scene: a condom containing the killer's DNA. This single biological breadcrumb would become the most vital tool in their hunt. Part 2: The Hunt and the Capture. With a new murder confirmed, police intensified their efforts, employing a tactic as old as detective work itself: the sting operation. A female police officer, Officer Jensen, went undercover, posing as a prostitute in a high-crime area, a calculated risk to lure the predator out of the shadows. The plan was a tense waiting game. For days, the team of undercover detectives watched, their anxiety mounting. On a July night, a vehicle began to stalk Officer Jensen. The driver was a white male with short, dark hair and a distinct predatory stillness. A veteran officer on the lookout team instantly recognized him. It was Todd Allen Reed. The name was known to them: a 32-year-old registered sex offender with a criminal record for burglary and assault. Reed had, in the eyes of the law, paid his debt to society, and yet the officer's gut told him this was their man. The surveillance continued until a conclusive moment was reached. On July 18, 1999, Todd Allen Reed was arrested at his job at Ranella Produce, a place where he was known as a quiet, diligent worker. The ordinariness of his workplace stood in shocking contrast to the monstrous acts he was suspected of committing. The DNA from the condom was rushed for analysis. The result was definitive: a perfect match. The Forest Park Killer had a name, a face, and a history. As the case against Reed solidified, a third victim was identified: Alexandria Nicole Eisen, a 17-year-old transient runaway, had been found by a hiker on June 20, a quarter mile from the other bodies. She too had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The pattern was now confirmed, and the city could finally breathe a collective, albeit fragile, sigh of relief. The monster was behind bars. Part 3: Justice and Lingering Shadows. Faced with the overwhelming evidence and the possibility of a death sentence, Todd Allen Reed chose to spare himself the agony of a trial. On February 23, 2001, he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder. It was a cold, pragmatic act of self-preservation, robbing the victims' families of a full public reckoning, but ensuring their tormentor would never again walk free. The court sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. For the murders of Lila Faye Moeller, Stephanie Lynn Russell, and Alexandria Nicole Eisen, justice was served. However, the Todd Allen Reed case holds another, more chilling dimension. It reopened 2 cold cases from 12 years earlier. In 1987, 2 young girls, Jennifer Lynn Cheer, 15, and Mindy Colleen Thomas, 12, had vanished from Gresham, a suburb of Portland. Their remains were later found, both having been strangled. At the time of their disappearances, Reed was a teenager, and both girls were last seen with his girlfriend at the time. The police description of the suspect from 1987, a young white male with dark hair and thick eyebrows, fit the younger Todd Allen Reed to a terrifying degree. While Reed was questioned about these unsolved murders, he was never charged. The lack of definitive evidence meant the cases remained officially unsolved. But to investigators, The parallels were too stark to be a coincidence. The modus operandi, the victim profiles, and the circumstantial ties were all there, suggesting that Reed's murderous career may have begun years before his first known victims. Todd Allen Reed remains in prison, a living embodiment of the capacity for evil that can lurk in plain sight. He is a grim reminder that a person can be known and yet be a complete stranger to those around them. The story of the Forest Park Killer serves as a permanent, painful mark on the city of Portland, a place where the beauty of nature was once used to conceal the ugliness of a monster's crimes. The families of his confirmed victims have some measure of closure, but for the families of Jennifer Cheer and Mindy Thomas, the case of Todd Allen Reed leaves a haunting and enduring question mark over their daughter's fates. For nearly 10 years, O'Brien fought his death sentence through a series of appeals. On March 31, 1984, after numerous stays and legal battles, his appeals were exhausted. As he was being taken to the execution chamber, a group of angry protesters gathered outside, some shouting "Trick or treat" and "Ding dong, the witch is dead." It was the final haunting display of public contempt for the man who had poisoned a holiday and murdered his own son for money. His former wife, Dayneen, who had testified against him and divorced him, stated that she was glad it was coming to an end. "I know in my deepest heart of hearts that he is responsible for my son's death," she said. O'Brien, however, went to his death maintaining his innocence, a final chilling act of self-deception. He became the 16th person to be executed in the United States since 1977, and the 4th by lethal injection. His body was a monument to the ultimate betrayal, a father who sacrificed his child on the altar of his own greed, as the prosecutor would so famously put it. The Princess Doe Case, a 40-year mystery. Part 1. The Unnamed Girl of Cedar Ridge. On a scorching hot morning in July of 1982, the small, peaceful town of Blairstown, New Jersey, was forever changed. The heat was a living, breathing thing, a humid blanket that clung to the air and the skin, the kind of summer day that promised laziness and long, easy hours, but that for one man would become a day of unimaginable horror. George Keese, a gravedigger who had known the quiet rhythm of this cemetery for years, was working in the secluded, wooded section of Cedar Ridge. This was a place of final rest, a sanctuary of stone and manicured grass, a place where the dead lay undisturbed. But this morning, something was deeply, terribly wrong. As he worked, George noticed a small, disturbed patch of ground near a steep bank that led down to a stream. It was a crude, shallow grave, hastily dug as if by someone with no time or patience. A feeling of dread, cold and sharp, pierced through the summer heat. He saw a flash of red beneath the scattered leaves and branches. With his heart hammering against his ribs, he knelt down and began to clear the debris. The sight that met his eyes was a vision from a nightmare. It was the body of a teenage girl. She was lying on her back, her face a grotesque, unrecognizable ruin, bludgeoned beyond all hope of identification. She was clothed in a red short-sleeved shirt and a long, flowing red peasant skirt adorned with a distinctive peacock pattern at the hem. She wore no shoes, no socks, and no undergarments. A delicate golden cross necklace was tangled in her dark hair, a poignant symbol of innocence and faith in a place of such brutal violence. A macabre detail, noted by investigators, was the red nail polish on the fingernails of her right hand, while her left hand remained unpolished. It was a detail so small and yet so human, a lingering fragment of a life that had been so cruelly extinguished. Blairstown was a town of a few thousand people, a place where doors were left unlocked and neighbors knew one another's business. A murder of this magnitude was not only unprecedented, it was unthinkable. The local police department, a small force of dedicated officers, was ill-equipped to handle a homicide of this nature. The first officer on the scene was a young and earnest lieutenant named Eric Krantz. He was a man who believed in justice and a man who had never forgotten the faces of the missing. Standing over the body, he felt a profound sense of sorrow and a fierce resolve. This girl was a stranger, an unknown, but he would not let her be forgotten. He knew he had to give her a name, a human connection in the face of such inhumanity. He named her Princess Doe, a name that would come to symbolize the countless unidentified victims of violent crime, and a promise that he would not rest until her true identity was found. Part 2: The Hunt for a Phantom. The discovery of Princess Doe launched an investigation that would span 4 decades and touch countless lives. The Warren County Prosecutor's Office and the New Jersey State Police joined the small Blairstown Department, but the case was a riddle wrapped in an enigma. Who was she? Why was she in a quiet rural cemetery in New Jersey, far from any known home? How could someone so young and vibrant simply vanish without a trace? The first challenge was simply to give her back her name. Investigators worked tirelessly, sending her fingerprints to the FBI, circulating composites of her face based on her skull structure, and distributing flyers with her image and the details of her clothing. The distinctive peacock skirt became a symbol of her case, a visual that captured the public's imagination and sorrow. The case quickly gained national attention. The media, fascinated by the tragic story, dubbed her Princess Doe, and the name stuck. For a time, she was the face of all unidentified victims. Tips poured in from all corners of the country. For a while, the leading theory was that she was Diane Janice Dye, a runaway from San Jose, California, who had vanished in 1979. The resemblance was striking, and some law enforcement officials were so convinced they even held a press conference declaring her to be Dye. But Lieutenant Krantz, who had by now become almost a second father to the case, had his doubts. He felt that the timeline and circumstances didn't align. He was right. Years later, in 2003, DNA testing conclusively proved that Princess Doe was not Diane Dye. The ghost of an identity was laid to rest, but the true identity remained a frustrating and painful mystery. The community of Blairstown, deeply affected by the discovery, adopted Princess Doe as one of their own. They raised money for her burial, refusing to let her lie in an unmarked grave. In January of 1983, she was laid to rest in the very cemetery where she was found. Her headstone, a simple stone cross, bore a heartbreaking inscription, a testament to a town's compassion. Princess Doe, missing from home, dead among strangers, remembered by all. She was a symbol, not just of a crime, but of a town's collective grief and its refusal to forget. The case became the first unidentified decedent to be entered into the National Crime Information Center, NCIC, a landmark moment in forensic history, but still, her name remained elusive. Part 3: A Confession from the Abyss. The Princess Doe case went cold, but it never went away. It lingered in the minds of the investigators, a nagging, unsolved puzzle. The case files grew thicker, the leads fewer, but the determination of those who worked on it never waned. The years turned into decades. In 2005, a new and unexpected lead emerged from the unlikeliest of places, a New York State prison. Arthur Kinlaw, a man already serving a sentence of 20 years to life for the murders of 2 other women, had reached out to authorities. In a series of chilling, dispassionate interviews and even a written affidavit, he confessed to killing a teenage girl in New Jersey in 1982. He knew details only the killer could know. He described meeting a teenage girl named Dawn on Long Island. He said he had tried to lure her into prostitution, and when she refused, he had driven her to New Jersey. He confessed to brutally murdering her and leaving her body in a cemetery. He even described the clothing she was wearing. But there was a problem, a massive, unmovable obstacle. A confession, even one as detailed as Kinlaw's, was not enough. The legal system required corroboration. Without a positive identification of the victim, there could be no prosecution. The state of New Jersey couldn't charge a man with the murder of a person who, according to all official records, did not exist. For all his horrifying admissions, Princess Doe remained a Jane Doe. The case, now a frustrating stalemate, remained open. Part 4, The Technological Breakthrough, and Zinkhovdeplacer. B. For another 16 years, the case lay dormant. A confession without a victim without a name. But the world of forensic science was quietly, inexorably catching up. New technologies were emerging, promising to solve the unsolvable. In 2021, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMET, a powerful advocate for missing and unidentified persons, offered to provide financial assistance to retest Princess Doe's DNA. The sample was from a single molar root, a tiny, seemingly insignificant piece of her. The sample was sent to Astria Forensics, a company specializing in extracting DNA from degraded or difficult samples. The work was painstaking, a race against time and decay, but they succeeded. They were able to extract a full DNA profile from the 200 milligram tooth root. It was a miracle of modern science, a breakthrough that would have been impossible just a decade earlier. The DNA profile was then forwarded to Innovative Forensic Investigations, a company at the forefront of genetic genealogy. This was where the real work of solving the puzzle began. The profile was uploaded to public genealogy databases, a vast global network of individuals who had willingly submitted their genetic information. A forensic genealogist, Jennifer Moore, began to build a family tree, tracing the victim's lineage through distant relatives. It was a painstaking, methodical process, a search for a name, a life, a story. The puzzle pieces, scattered and buried for 40 years, began to click into place. The trail led to a family in New York. The DNA profile indicated a high probability that Princess Doe was a member of the Olanek family. The investigators contacted the family, a cautious, hopeful meeting. They spoke with Robert Olanek Jr., who confirmed that his sister Dawn Rita Olanek, a 17-year-old from Bohemia, New York, had run away from home in the summer of 1982. He hadn't seen her since. A DNA sample from Dawn's sister was obtained, and it was a match. Princess Doe, the girl who had been known to the world only by a nickname, finally had her name back. She was Dawn Rita Olanek. Part 5, Justice at Last. On July 15, 2022, exactly 40 years to the day after her body was found, a press conference was held in the Warren County courtroom. The room was packed with reporters, officers, and members of the community who had never forgotten. The tension was palpable. The Warren County prosecutor, James Pfeiffer, stood at the podium, flanked by the now retired Lieutenant Eric Kranz and other investigators. Pfeiffer's voice was filled with a sense of triumph and profound relief. For 40 years we have had a victim with no name. Today we stand before you to tell you that this is no longer the case. Princess Doe has a name. She is Dawn Rita Olanek. The news was met with a stunned silence, followed by a collective murmur of relief. The emotional weight of 4 decades was finally being lifted. He continued, and today, we can also tell you that we have an individual charged with her murder. Arthur Kinlaw, who is currently incarcerated for other murders, has been formally charged with the murder of Dawn Olanek. The arrest warrant had been issued on July 13, 2022. The confession that had been a ghost of a lead for nearly 2 decades was now backed by irrefutable evidence. The case, a symbol of a forgotten victim, was finally, definitively closed. The news was a testament to the power of persistence, the dedication of law enforcement, and the incredible strides made in forensic science. Epilogue: A Life Remembered. In the serene, hallowed grounds of Cedar Ridge Cemetery, a new headstone now stands beside the old. The new stone bears the name Dawn Rita Olanek, a testament to the life and identity that were finally returned to her. The old stone, Princess Doe, remains a memorial to the young girl who was once a stranger, a symbol of the town's enduring commitment and the compassion of countless people who refused to let her be forgotten. The story of Princess Doe, now the story of Dawn Olanek, is a poignant and powerful narrative. It is a testament to a community that adopted a stranger as their own, to a small-town detective who never gave up, and to the scientific advancements that can bring closure to the most heartbreaking of mysteries. It is a reminder that even after decades, the truth will not be silenced, and the dead will not be forgotten. The case of Dawn Olanek is a story of a long-denied justice, and the powerful, unyielding belief that every life, no matter how brief or troubled, deserves to be remembered. The Jane Hylton case, a legacy of injustice and a triumph of science. Part 1: The Night of the Red Carnations. The year was 1985, a time of big hair, neon colors, and the quiet promise of suburban life. In the rolling hills of El Dorado County, California, lay the peaceful community of El Dorado Hills. It was a place where neighbors knew one another by name, where children played in sun-dappled yards, and where the most significant events were usually the annual 4th of July parade or the high school football game. In the midst of this idyllic normalcy lived Jane Hylton. At 54, she was a woman of quiet dignity and sharp intellect, a beloved columnist for the local newspaper, the Foothills Times. Her words wove the fabric of the community, celebrating its triumphs and comforting it in times of sorrow. She was a fixture of warmth and kindness, a person who had earned the respect and affection of all who knew her. Her home, a modest, comfortable house with a well-tended garden, was a reflection of her spirit, welcoming and serene. On a warm September night, the crickets began their familiar rhythmic song, and the moon, a sliver of polished pearl, rose over the rooftops. Jane was at her writing desk, a place of sanctuary where she translated her observations into the elegant prose that her readers adored. With her were 2 house guests, Ricky Davis, a gentle, unassuming young man of 21 and a longtime family friend, and his girlfriend. They were asleep in a separate room, exhausted from their day, their rest a stark contrast to the terror that was about to unfold. There was no sudden crash, no blaring alarm. The sound was a soft, insidious scraping at the back door. It was the sound of a living thing trying to force its way in, a sound that violated the sacred peace of the night. Jane's fingers, poised over the typewriter keys, froze. Her head snapped up, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She was a sensible woman, not prone to flights of fancy, but a primal fear coiled in her gut. The scraping stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the sound itself. She rose from her desk and moved quietly to the back door, peering through the glass. Nothing. She sighed in relief, the tension draining from her shoulders. But as she turned, a shadow detached itself from the darkness of the hallway. He was a phantom, a presence that defied logic. He was Michael Green, a 16-year-old boy, and he had been watching the house. He was no thief, no opportunistic burglar. He was a killer, and he moved with the chilling, predatory grace of a serpent. Jane's breath caught in her throat, her mouth opening in a silent scream. A hand, cold and strong, clapped over her mouth. The golden light from a nearby lamp glinted off a knife blade. The struggle was a desperate, chaotic ballet of terror. A lamp crashed to the floor, plunging the room into a chaotic mix of moonlight and shadow. A chair was overturned, a vase shattered. Jane fought with a ferocity born of a will to live, but she was no match for the brutal strength of her assailant. The struggle ended with a series of sickening, wet sounds. Green left her on the living room floor, her body still and broken, a red carnation of blood blooming on the front of her nightgown, and a knife plunged into her back. He slipped out the front door, a ghost in the cool night air, leaving behind no witnesses, no signs of forced entry, and no fingerprints. The only sound in the silent house was the relentless ticking of a clock, counting the moments since a life had been so cruelly extinguished. Part 2. The construction of a lie. The morning brought with it the kind of sun-drenched innocence that made the discovery all the more horrifying. Ricky Davis and his girlfriend woke to the silence of the house and the sight of the crime scene. The 911 call was frantic, tear-choked. The small-town police department, unaccustomed to such violence, was suddenly overwhelmed. Detective Sam Miller, a veteran with a career's worth of experience, arrived on the scene. He was a man who had seen the worst of humanity, but the sheer brutality of this crime was staggering. There were no signs of forced entry, no valuables taken. This wasn't a robbery. This was a crime of pure rage, of malice, of personal violation. In their haste to find an answer, the police turned their attention to the two people in the house who were not dead. Ricky Davis and his girlfriend. Ricky was a well-liked kid, a friend of Jane's son, but his presence in the house made him the obvious and, in the eyes of the investigators, the most convenient suspect. The investigators, perhaps blinded by a need for a quick resolution, began to construct a narrative that was easier to believe than the terrifying alternative, that a random, unknown killer had walked in and out of a quiet suburban home without a trace. Ricky and his girlfriend were questioned for hours. They were exhausted, grieving, and terrified. The investigators, using classic interrogation techniques, began to pressure them. They told them they knew they were lying. They told Ricky that his girlfriend had already implicated him. They fed him details of the crime scene that had not been released to the public. He was a young, scared kid, not a hardened criminal. He was easy to manipulate. In his state of emotional and physical exhaustion, he began to repeat details he had been told. The police interpreted this as a confession. The narrative solidified. Ricky Davis, a spurned suitor, had murdered Jane in a fit of rage. The public, hungry for an explanation for such a senseless crime, accepted the story. The media reports painted a picture of a jealous, enraged young man who had betrayed the trust of a kind and generous woman. The truth was obscured by a convenient and plausible lie, a lie that would condemn an innocent man to a life behind bars. The circumstantial evidence, though flimsy, was enough to make the case stick. The lack of forced entry was a key detail, one that seemed to point directly to someone known to the victim. The fact that a teenager could have simply walked in through an unlocked back door in a supposedly safe neighborhood was too unsettling to contemplate. Part 3. the wheels of injustice. The trial was a grim theater of justice, a painful procession of misinterpretations and assumptions. Ricky Davis, now gaunt and hollow-eyed, sat at the defense table, his face a mask of disbelief. He was on trial for a crime he could not comprehend, a nightmare he could not escape. The prosecution laid out a case built on insinuation, flimsy circumstantial evidence, and a coerced confession. They painted a picture of a jealous young man, a monster hidden behind a pleasant facade. They presented the inconsistencies in his girlfriend's testimony, the lack of a corroborated alibi, and the chilling details he had confessed. His defense team, outmatched and outmaneuvered, argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that the confession was coerced, a product of intimidation and exhaustion, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. The jury, a group of ordinary people trying to make sense of an extraordinary crime, was swayed by the polished narrative presented by the prosecution. After a tense deliberation, they returned with a verdict that sealed Ricky's fate. The foreman stood. The words landed like a physical blow. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Ricky Davis, guilty of murder in the second degree." Ricky's head dropped into his hands, the weight of a life sentence descending upon him. He was a young man with a life ahead of him, and in that single devastating moment, it was taken from him, a miscarriage of justice, a tragic conclusion to a story that was never truly investigated, only constructed. Part 4. A Glimmer of Hope. A Glimmer of Hope. For 14 long, grueling years, Ricky Davis lived a life he did not deserve. He was a man imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, a ghost in a system that had failed him. His family, shattered by the conviction, never gave up on him. They knew their son was innocent, and they fought for him with a fierce and unwavering love. In the late 1990s, a new hope emerged. The Northern California Innocence Project, a group dedicated to overturning wrongful convictions through scientific evidence, took on his case. They were the perfect cavalry, a team of dedicated lawyers and investigators who saw the case not through the lens of a preconceived narrative, but through the cold, hard facts of science. They unearthed the original case files, preserved in dusty boxes and on forgotten shelves. They found the most crucial piece of all, the original blood and semen samples collected from the crime scene. In 1985, these samples were useless for identification purposes. But in the year 2000, a new, powerful tool had changed the landscape of criminal justice: DNA analysis. The samples were sent to a state-of-the-art lab. The process was painstaking, a meticulous search for a truth that had been buried for years. A few weeks later, the results came back, and they were a lightning bolt, a stunning revelation that would shake the very foundation of the case. The DNA from the crime scene did not belong to Ricky Davis. The news was a triumphant vindication, a scientific testament to his innocence. The team filed a motion to overturn the conviction. The district attorney's office, now under new leadership, agreed to a new review of the case. The evidence was overwhelming. The DNA from the crime scene belonged to an unknown male, an unidentified phantom who had walked free for 14 years, while an innocent man served his time. Ricky Davis's conviction was overturned. He walked out of prison a free man, his innocence restored after 14 long stolen years. He was a man in his late 30s who had lost his entire youth to a crime he never committed, but he was free. Part 5. The Truth Revealed by the Genome. Ricky Davis was free, but the murder of Jane Hyleton remained an unsolved cold case. The DNA profile of the unknown male was still in the system, a ghost of a killer waiting to be identified. For the next 2 decades, the case file remained open, a chilling reminder of a murderer who had walked away with impunity. But just as DNA analysis had exonerated Ricky, a new and even more powerful technology would ultimately bring the real killer to justice. Genetic genealogy, a tool that could take an unknown DNA profile and trace it through a vast network of family trees, was beginning to revolutionize cold case investigations. The Jane Hylton case was given to a forensic genealogist, a digital detective who began to build a family tree, brick by painstaking brick. The search led investigators to a man whose name was Michael Green. He was a ghost from the past, a forgotten suspect who had been a teenage boy at the time of the crime. Investigators, working with the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office, began to build a new case, a case that had been waiting for 35 years. They found Michael Green, now in his 50s, living a seemingly normal life in a nearby town. They obtained a DNA sample from him, a simple, non-invasive process. The sample was sent to the lab, and the results came back. The DNA was a match. The DNA found at the crime scene in 1985, the DNA of the killer, belonged to Michael Green. He was the phantom from the darkness, the boy who had become a killer and who had escaped justice for over 3 decades. Part 6. A Measure of Peace. A Measure of Peace. In 2020, Michael Green was brought to court. He was now a middle-aged man, his face a mask of impassivity. The courtroom was packed, the media documenting the final chapter of a story that had spanned decades. He pleaded no contest to the charge of second-degree murder, a legal maneuver to avoid a trial while still acknowledging his guilt. The judge sentenced him to 15 years to life, a sentence that would have been longer had he been an adult at the time of the crime. Outside the courthouse, Ricky Davis stood before the cameras, a free man. His face was a study in profound emotion, a mix of relief, sadness, and a quiet sense of closure. His youth had been stolen, his life irrevocably altered, but he had a powerful message. For a very long time, he said, his voice choked with emotion, I lived with a weight that was not mine to carry, but today, that weight is gone. I never lost hope, and I never gave up on the truth. I just hope that Jane's family can finally find some peace. The story of Jane Hylton is a testament to the fact that justice, though it may be delayed, can never be fully denied. It is a story of a wrongful conviction, of a life stolen, and of a relentless search for the truth. It is a powerful reminder of the fallibility of a system that is built on human perception and the ultimate triumph of science in the pursuit of justice. It is a story that proves that even after decades, a tiny forgotten piece of DNA can become a beacon of hope, leading to the exoneration of an innocent man and the ultimate capture of the true killer.